Monasticism is a religious and isolated way of living that is focused on self-disciplined contemplation and spiritual disciplines. Given the life of isolation that we're all asked to live right now, here are 3 saints who chose to live an isolated life and spend some of that time in pursuit of deepening their spirituality and growing in holiness: St. Anthony, St. Benedict, and St. Ignatius. St. Anthony lived in the 3rd and 4th centuries, and we know about him mostly from St. Athanasius, who famously argued at the Council of Nicaea in defense of the doctrine of the Trinity. St. Athanasius got his formation from his mentor, St. Anthony. So St. Anthony grew up in a wealthy family, and when he was just 18, both of his parents died. And he spent the next 6 months discerning what he should do with his life. And while attending Mass and hearing the gospel read aloud, he felt that it was Jesus Christ speaking directly to him when he heard the verse in Matthew 19:21, that if you wish to be perfect, go sell all of your possessions, give your money to the poor, and then you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. So St. Anthony took that to heart, and he sold everything he had, including 300 acres of land. He made sure that his sister was taken care of. And then he went off into the desert and became known as the father of desert monasticism. Anthony sought out holy men who exemplified different virtues that he wished to aspire, and he used them as a living Christian model to excel in those virtues himself. When he did just that, living this holy life, the devil began to engage him in this brutal spiritual combat. See, Anthony had secluded himself in a tomb to acquire more self-knowledge. And Satan didn't want Anthony's devotion in this desert, in this holy area, to spread. And so one night in a cave, the devil approached St. Anthony with a multitude of demons. The next morning, when Anthony's servant, who would come check on him every so often, found him lying as though he thought he was dead because he had been beaten physically almost to death. And so he brought him back into the town, assuming he was dead, but at midnight he was miraculously revived. St. Anthony insisted that they bring him back to his cave so he could finish his battle with the devil. And sure enough, the devil reappeared with all of his demons in an even greater number. And they appeared in devils and in animals, attacking him with horns and teeth and claws and insults. And Anthony actually laughed at the devil, noticing the greater numbers, which must have reflected the weakness of Satan's power, trying to intimidate him with these greater numbers. And with that, the cave opened up, and this bright light shone in, and the devils and the demons disappeared. And Anthony recognized that that light was Christ. And immediately he very bluntly asked, "Where were you? Why did you not help me from the beginning?" And Christ answered, "I was here, Anthony, but I wanted to see and abide to see your battle. And because you have persevered and were not defeated, that I will make you known throughout the world." In this universal call to our spiritual combat, it's Christ's desire to see us fight bravely and to persevere just as Anthony did. Our second great cave saint is St. Benedict, who lived in the 5th and 6th century. Once again, he was from a wealthy family in the town of Nursia. And as wealthy families tend to do, they sent him off to Rome to study. But this was the time that the Holy Roman Empire had just collapsed. And so, desiring to devote his life to God and realizing that he was in this declining culture, that this doesn't exactly lend itself to living a life oriented towards the gospel. And so he decided he wanted to live in isolation, secretly in a cave outside this town of Subiaco. The only one who knew where he was St. Romanus. St. Romanus would come periodically with loaves of bread and lower them on a rope into his cave. It just came to be that people wanted to know where Benedict was, and so they would follow Romanus. And St. Benedict became this saint who was known to be a mystic and a wonder worker. And over time, this community of monks wanted Benedict to lead them, to be their abbot. But he warned them that his way of living was incredibly strict, so he recommended that they find someone else to lead them. Well, as time would have it, they grew to resent Benedict because of the harshness and strictness way of life, and they actually tried to poison his wine. But as he said the blessing before the meal, the wine glass shattered. Benedict, realizing that this was due to them trying to poison him, he got up, he forgave all of the monks, and then he went back into isolation, into his cave outside Subiaco. Over the next several years, he then went on to found 12 more monasteries outside of Subiaco, and he was the spiritual father of all of them. Eventually, he left Subiaco and he went to Monte Cassino, where he remained for the rest of his life, and forming a single close-knit community. And it was here at Monte Cassino that Benedict authored his Benedictine rule. And it's considered one of the most important factors in the development of Christian Europe. After this Holy Roman Empire collapsed, and in the centuries to follow, it was the Benedictines who became the movers and shapers of culture. They are responsible for what we now call social services. They were the ones who would welcome foreigners. They invented legal personhood. They were the creators and sustainers of civilization. Monasteries were filled with scribes who kept and copied and passed on ancient texts. They were the source of learning. They preserved book printing and binding, specifically philosophical and scientific texts. The arts and sciences were completely reinvigorated. It was Benedictine monks who invented musical notation. They had all kinds of technological innovations, from wine, cheese, beer, brandy, the clock mechanism, and many agricultural inventions, such as the horse saddle with stirrups, the horse collar, the horseshoe, and soil cultivations, which also new ways of harnessing energy, which then led to a population boom and new innovations and new productivity, new ways of harnessing energy. From this, Western civilization was revitalized and the culture transformed, all from the fruits of a saintly hermit who simply aspired to holiness. This life lived in this radical witness exemplifies how we can all live lives of sacrifice and service to God and neighbor. Benedict is also hailed as the father of Western monasticism. He has many stories of exorcising demons from people, and the Benedict medal, which I wear, is known to be especially advantageous for spiritual warfare. Our final cave saint is Ignatius of Loyola. He lived in the 15th and 16th centuries. Once again, the son of a noble and wealthy family, he thought very highly of chivalry and knighthood, and he became a knight. At 30 years old, in the Battle of Pamplona, defending from the French, he was wounded by a cannonball, which struck and fractured his right leg and damaged his left. Now, up to this point in his life, Ignatius was admittedly vain, living this life of vanity. But after his treatment in Pamplona, and after having been transported to Loyola, his condition became so serious that they thought he was going to die. But he decided to undergo this very painful surgery to correct the mistake from when his broken leg was first set. And it was in this recovery that he was on bed rest for several weeks. And he decided to use that time well, to spend it reading. And so first he read a life of Christ, and he read books on the lives of saints, and he read many other books. But it was these lives of the saints that so captivated him. And in particular, it was these prologues written by a monk who described these saintly lives as lives of service that were lived in holy chivalry for God. This idea of chivalry for God moved Ignatius. And with the time that he had, spending it in reflection, he resolved to imitate these saints in order to do penance for his sins. So the following winter, about 8 months later, he made a pilgrimage to a mountain, Mount Sarat, where he spent the next 3 days confessing his sins, and he hung his sword and dagger near the statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary, to which he attributed his being saved from death. He then abandoned his ambitions. He clothed himself in sackcloth and spent the entire night in prayer. From there, he moved to a nearby town called Manresa, where he lived as a beggar. He ate and drank very little. He often didn't even groom himself, which is a big step from living a life of vanity. He even scourged himself. And for the next 11 months, he went to daily mass and then would spend time in a cave for up to 7 hours a day in prayer. Of course, we know St. Ignatius from going on to found a religious order, the Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuits. And he underwent many spiritual trials. He became deep in wisdom and understanding of the faith, which led him to make this popular daily reflection known as the Examen. It's a process where you look at your daily life, where God has been present, areas where you can be a better Christian. And he also went on to author the Spiritual Exercises, which is a manual containing a dynamic system of spirituality. This booklet is an adaptation of the Gospels, which Ignatius would use to lead many retreats. So look for these links in the description below for Benedict's rule and Ignatius, his spiritual exercises. But these 3 cave saints who chose to live a life in this period of isolation can give us each lessons in holiness. Remember, Christ told Anthony, "I am here, abiding to see you persevere in your battle." Similarly, Christ is here beside us now, and it's his desire to see us fight bravely and persevere to aspire in holiness. Benedict exemplifies how we can all live lives of sacrifice and service to God and neighbor, that we can let the bad fall away so as to revitalize what is good. And finally, Ignatius. He teaches us how to reflect. So seek a copy of the spiritual exercises and give yourself a retreat at home. And as Ignatius learned to do so well, imitate the saints.